Hello and welcome to a tactical history of Liverpool. Just 7 weeks after beating Arsenal in episode 7, Liverpool were on their way back down to London to play Fulham. In the intervening period, Liverpool had continued to extend their lead at the top of the Football League, going undefeated. They followed up the win over Arsenal with a draw at home to West Brom, but then won all 4 of their next 4 games, putting them 9 points clear of second place Burnley. In the era of 2 points for a win, this appeared to be an insurmountable gap, and Liverpool looked set to be named champions for a second time under the management of Bill Shankly. Meanwhile, Fulham were rock bottom of the league, having won just one of their previous 14 league matches. The Cottagers were managed by Vic Buckingham. Having spent pretty much the entirety of his playing career at Tottenham Hotspur, Buckingham had a preference for passing football. Possession is the thing, not kick and rush, Buckingham said. Long ball football is too risky. Most of the time what pays off is educated skills. If you got the ball, keep it. The other side can't score. I like to have people who could dominate other sides playing like that. After spells coaching in amateur and lower league football, Buckingham got his first taste of management at the highest level with West Brom, where he nearly won the double in 1954, winning the FA Cup but only finishing as runners-up in the league. West Brom would never finish so high again under Buckingham though, and in 1959 he opted to move abroad, taking over at Ajax. Buckingham wasn't the first Englishman to coach Ajax, as over the course of 3 spells in charge of the club spanning several decades, Jack Reynolds had laid the groundwork. Like Buckingham, Reynolds believed in the primacy of technical passing football, and spent countless hours coaching not just the first team, but the youth sides too, to instill a style across the club. Finding a club already primed to play in his style, Buckingham won the league in his first season at Ajax. Their skills were different, he said. Their intellect was different and they played proper football, but didn't get this from me. It was there waiting to be stirred up. It was just a case of telling them to keep more possession. I've always thought possession is 9/10 of the game, and Ajax played possession football. It was lovely. I used to just sit back and relax. I influenced them, but then they went on and did things above that which delighted me. They'd have a rhythm, go from the left side of the field to the right side of the field, but make progress of 30 or 40 or 50 yards as well, keeping the ball all the time. You have to have a lot of skill to do that, and we trained all the time on it. Buckingham returned to his homeland to take over at Sheffield Wednesday, but was sacked after some of his players were involved in match fixing. Buckingham hadn't taken part in the scandal, yet his lax discipline was blamed for encouraging it to flourish. He returned to Amsterdam to take over at Ajax again, yet his second spell was nowhere near as successful. He was sacked in January, with Ajax fighting relegation, having lost 9-4 to rivals Feyenoord, to be replaced by Rinus Michels. To some extent, Buckingham and his passing football, along with Reynolds, laid the foundations at Ajax for what was to be the most successful period in their history, but Michels launched them into another stratosphere. They were open-minded, but tactically, you have to see where we were at the time, recalled Johan Cruyff, who was handed his debut by Buckingham. Football in Holland then was good, but it was not really professional. They gave us some professionalism because they were much further down the road, but the tactical thinking came later with Michels. It started then. Leaving Ajax in a relegation battle, Buckingham jumped right back into another, joining Fulham that same month. Fulham had been promoted to the first division under Buckingham's predecessor Bedford Jezzard, and despite some close calls, he managed to keep them there with the help of general manager Frank Osborne and trainer Frank Penn. It was no easy task though. Waning attendances were cutting into Fulham's already limited budget, and the situation wasn't exactly helped by chairman Tommy Trinder, a comedian who would use his club's woes as part of his act. Things came to a head when Alan Mullery was sold to Tottenham. Not only were Fulham losing one of their best players, but Trinder had negotiated the transfer behind Jezzard's back, leaving it to the player to announce it to his shock manager and teammates. When Osborne decided to retire in 1964, Jezzard and Penn joined him rather than continuing on with a board they no longer trusted. Fulham managed to narrowly avoid relegation in 1965 once Buckingham took over, finishing 20th, yet they were right back in the midst of another struggle to avoid the drop the next season. Despite their poor form, Fulham did possess some good players. Fullback George Cohen was an England international, while according to Tommy Smith, Shankly, ever the psychologist, greeted Johnny Haynes to Anfield by saying, "Johnny, it's an honour to welcome you here. You were truly a great player." One of the main problems was simply that Buckingham wasn't popular with the players, Rodney Marsh had been key to staying up the season prior, but was sold on after ridiculing the manager, as was Bobby Keach after the defender reacted negatively to Buckingham's attempts to teach him a dance routine to improve his balance. According to Kenneth Wolstenholme, Buckingham wasn't even present to welcome Liverpool.
Vic Buckingham is away today looking for new players.
He presumably left his duties to new coach Dave Sexton. We introduced Sexton in episode 6 as one of the brains behind Tommy Docherty's Chelsea. However, he was given his first chance as a manager by Leyton Orient in 1965. He didn't take to it though, resigning before the year was out, leaving him free to join Fulham's staff in January 1966. Fulham may have managed just 1 point in their last 5 games prior to facing Liverpool, yet this was still an improvement compared to how they were playing before Sexton's arrival. Whereas before Christmas they were getting thrashed by the likes of Leicester and Northampton, now they were limiting Manchester United, Tottenham and Burnley, all near the top of the league, to narrow single-goal wins. They were still heading towards relegation, but Sexton had at least tightened up their defence. Generally wedded to the WM, Buckingham picked the same 11 that had narrowly lost to Spurs the previous week. Johnny Haynes had given up his usual number 10 shirt to take the number 9, but he wasn't tasked with leading the line. Instead, this duty fell to Graham Leggett. The Scot was typically a right winger, however he had an eye for goal that meant he could fill in at centre forward, which was necessary now Rodney Marsh had left for QPR. Youngsters Steve Earle and Les Barrett were chosen on the wings. Liverpool, meanwhile, played the same 11 that we saw in episode 7. With everyone fit, it was their strongest side, lining up in a 4-2-4 formation. With the contrasting fortunes of the two sides, the match was presented as a foregone conclusion before a ball had even been kicked.
Now, if anything is certain in association football, this is a clash of certainties, because it looks as certain as a pretty recent victory that Fulham will go down to the second division at the end of the season, and as certain as an untold triumph over Thrush that Liverpool will be the champions of the first division.
Yet Fulham played in a modern way completely unexpected from a team footing up the table in 1966. They were essentially playing without a real striker. Leggett was what we would today call a false 9, the main focal point of the attack, but frequently dropping off into a position between the lines rather than looking to run in behind. We also saw this with Peter Osgood in episode 6, and while it allows the teams to progress the ball, there is also the risk of leaving no one in attack to actually score. Yet, unlike Chelsea, Fulham maintained a goal-scoring threat by having wingers Earle and Barrett make runs inside into the centre rather than staying wide. This had Leggett occupying Liverpool's centre-backs, creating space for the wingers to attack the space he was leaving. Behind them, Mark Persson would drop very deep to aid Bobby Robson and Stan Brown to work the ball forward. It was an issue we have seen repeated several times in this series already. When Liverpool dominate the midfield, they dominate games. If the opposition can win control over the midfield though, then Liverpool lose. With Persson dropping back to help out, Fulham would outnumber Liverpool deep in midfield, enabling them to play around them and draw out Willie Stevenson or Gordon Milne, which would in turn create space for Haynes or Leggett to pick up the ball between the lines and get at Liverpool's defence. It took Fulham just 11 minutes to take the lead. A long ball forward by Tommy Lawrence fell to Persson, who laid it off to Robson free in the centre circle. With the space to take his time, he slid the ball through to Leggett, dropping off the front line, dragging Ron Yates with him, while Earle made a run inside into the gap Leggett had left. With Earle pulling Jerry Byrne inside, Haynes had space down the right to make use of, and Leggett found him with a lovely pass. Haynes returned the ball back into the centre with a cross directly onto the head of Earle to finish. Fulham had taken the lead not by some smash and grab, but by actually dominating Liverpool. However, they weren't about to push their luck. With a goal advantage, Fulham looked to sit back to defend their lead. As was typical in the WM, half-backs Robson and Brown would drop in alongside centre-back John Dempsey when defending, forming a back five to protect their goal. This didn't leave space in the midfield for Liverpool to exploit though, as Fulham had their attacking midfielders drop back to just in front of the defensive line, forming two banks to make it difficult for Liverpool to break them down. Even when Fulham were attacking, Brown would typically stay very deep next to Dempsey, so that Fulham were practically playing with the back four that so many other teams were adopting at this time. Fulham's more defensive approach meant Liverpool were now exerting greater control over the match, but they looked bereft of ideas of how to break down the home side's packed defence. Ian Callaghan was coming into the middle to support Milne and Stevenson, which left space for Peter Thompson to roam across to the right flank as he typically did when he was struggling to get involved. Tommy Smith was also moving up to join the midfield, while Chris Lawler would venture forward into attack too. The problem was that there simply wasn't much space for Liverpool to exploit though, as Fulham were pulling men back into defence to protect their lead. With Fulham pulling their team back so deep, space did open up around the edge of the area for Liverpool to shoot from distance, but these long shots were pretty much the only chances Liverpool were getting. The match continued like this into the second half, and Liverpool's attempts to break down Fulham would only get harder as the pitch began to get cut up more and more, slowing their passing. There was also an extremely strong wind at Craven Cottage.
Well, I don't know what force of wind a typhoon is, but whatever it is, we've got it here at Craven Cottage, Fulham.
Fulham had benefited from this in the first half, with Jack McClellan's goal kicks carried right to the other end of the pitch, whereas Lawrence's would blow back towards him into attack for Fulham. Liverpool were unable to use this to their advantage once the team switched ends though, as Fulham pulling men back meant there was always someone on hand to mop up the loose ball. Smith was moved permanently into midfield in the second half, with Milne and Stevenson taking it in turns to partner Yates in defence, but otherwise Liverpool looked devoid of ideas to come back from behind. It was Fulham who would get the second goal of the game. They broke forward on the counter, with Haynes dragging out Yates, shrugging off the Scots' challenge to draw out Milne too, and sliding the ball into Leggett. Leggett played the ball on first time to Earle in the centre, who was left unmarked due to Yates stepping out, and he eventually scrambled a shot past Lawrence. Liverpool were understandably frustrated by their inability to break down Fulham, with Yates booked for something he said in front of the linesman, and Fulham were intelligent in playing it up, time wasting and keeping hold of the ball whenever they got the chance. Liverpool were getting increasingly wound up though, and things boiled over with just a few minutes left to play. Ian St John had had a torrid afternoon. First, the ball didn't quite fall right for him on two great chances to equalise early in the first half, while he spent portions of the second having to relace his boots. Fulham's late time wasting was the straw that broke the camel's back. St John fouled Persson from behind, and the Fulham man jumped to his feet and made the mistake of pulling St John's hair in retaliation. The Scot span round and landed a short right hand, knocking Persson out cold before St John could even swing his left hook. Despite his small stature, St John wasn't a player you wanted to mess with, as Persson learned the hard way. He possessed a fiery temper and had boxed as a youth, only giving it up because his mother objected. The muscle memory of his youth clearly hadn't left him, falling back into his stance after throwing his hook at Persson. Unsurprisingly, 2 goals and a man down, Liverpool did not mount a comeback. It was a bizarre match. A team looking destined for relegation came up against the champions-elect and beat them, not just by snatching a goal against the run of play, but by outplaying them. It could have easily been a weird footnote to the season, yet Fulham actually managed to use it to mount a great escape. Having only managed 7 victories prior to this game, they managed 8 in the remaining 12 games to avoid the drop, finishing 20th. The goals of Alan Clark, signed from Walsall shortly after the Liverpool game, propelled them to 18th for next season, yet Fulham were fighting a losing battle. Trinder brought Buckingham in as he wanted greater professionalism at the club, but he wasn't willing to provide the investment to actually make it a reality. Buckingham wanted to copy Ajax's model, with every level of the club playing the same system to enable homegrown players to transition from the youth and reserve squads to the first team, yet nothing ever came of it. Buckingham was sacked in January with Fulham in the relegation zone. Former player Bobby Robson took over, but he couldn't avert the drop, finishing rock bottom of the league. Fulham then proceeded to get relegated down to the 3rd division the next season, and wouldn't return to the first until 1999. Losing to Fulham wasn't quite what Liverpool expected, yet it wasn't exactly a disaster. They were now 8 points clear at the top of the Football League, rather than the 9 they started the day at. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. You can get updates on what I'm doing by following on Twitter and Facebook, links are in the description, but most importantly by supporting Holding Midfield on Patreon. Without financial support, I can't justify the time it goes into making these videos, so we keep the channel alive while also receiving access to premium content. Thanks for watching.